There's more sanctions that have gone out against Russia. How are they going to do the job? Where are we at with that? Is there any more options left after that? We're going to talk about that a little bit today on this trip down the road. But Michael Diamond joins us right now. Now, Michael is a military veteran. He is somebody that brings a veteran's perspective to gun reform. What should we do? Now, so many of you that are watching this show right now own guns. That's the culture here. I own guns. Too many guns, according to my wife. Not that she's anti-gun. She just can't figure out why when I deer hunt and pheasant hunt, I need that many guns. But that being said, I have a perspective of what should happen to protect Americans when it comes to guns. And I'm not sure that a lot of you agree with that. So let's just talk about it. Let's just sit back and have a conversation. Michael, good to have you coming down the road with us.
Hey, thanks, Joel. I really appreciate the invite, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Now, just a little more background. He's a former military intelligence officer with the U.S. Army Reserves, a veteran of Desert Storm, Task Force Freedom in Kuwait, for example, and the Kurdish refugee crisis of '91. So, Michael, you know what it's like to be out there. You know what it's like to be in harm's way. Fair to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. Want to talk to you about guns and the culture of guns in America. Just from a common sense standpoint, for gun owners like myself, what do you see when you see someone like me that has 20 guns in a gun safe?
I actually don't. I see in most cases, and probably in your case, an outdoor enthusiast, right? And that's fine. I've got a lot of friends and family who are probably not a lot different from you, right? So I don't have any real issue with the number of guns anybody has. I might have issue with who has guns or how they might be stored. But in terms of, for the vast majority of people, particularly people in the Dakotas and so forth, where there's such a strong hunting culture, it's not unusual to find people with a lot of guns.
So that being said, I think we're on the same page then. Why is it that many people like me won't have a conversation like the one we're having about guns? I don't get that, but I'm curious your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's that's really a great question, and the question we shall kind of be asking ourselves. My point of view on it is that that guns have now become not a tool, which they are in a sense. They have become a cultural marker. And so the position on guns has calcified on either side of this very unfortunate political divide that we have right now. And two sides have coalesced around unrealistic and I think in some cases lacking common sense approaches to a problem that I think we can all agree that we have in our country.
Now, folks, if you want to find his work, don't forget, he's a blogger on leadership and innovation, so you can see Michael's work pretty easy. But, you talk about, the common sense that would go from something like this. That's promoted, and it's promoted for a vote, just like you said, and it's clearly promoted for money. But the people that promote it the most, let's just take a look at the NRA, for example. I was an NRA member. I was, and I bought it, Michael, mostly for insurance, for my guns is the reason I bought it. But they just kept going further and further and further to the point where I just couldn't, in good conscience, send a membership money in anymore. And why did they have that much power when you have a gun owner like myself that finally says, look, you've gone too far?
Right. I think a couple things. One thing that I wish people understood about the NRA is the degree to which their primary mission, is to drive forward the commerce of guns in the United States. So when you start with that's your mission, how do we work with gun manufacturers to get more guns sold? Then you look for what your strategy is. The strategies around the Second Amendment talk track that they developed a couple decades ago were new to the NRA at the time, and became a lever upon which the NRA used to drive kind of a all guns everywhere sort of an agenda forward. And I think a lot of people, I think a lot of us have a hard time when we're really part of an organization that we believe in, and that organization changes over time. I think a lot of us have a hard time seeing that. Sometimes I'll refer to the NRA today as not your grandfather's NRA. You know, a lot of older American men who are part of the NRA today joined the NRA when the NRA was to them an organization that was aligned with the concepts of a wood grain shotgun and a father and a son going duck hunting for the first time together. You know, that kind of a image. And over time, the NRA moved into kind of a fear peddling handgun, black guns kind of a motif. And a lot of those folks who were part of that earlier manifestation of the NRA sort of haven't caught up to the fact that that NRA doesn't exist anymore. And this is a different one.
But are they ever, Michael? I mean, if you look at some of what's happened at the top figures at the NRA, I mean, some of these guys have been thieves. What more would you need to do to see it, to not say, look, I don't want to be associated with it?
It's astonishing to me that a hardworking person would send dues into our organization where the president is buying bespoke Italian suits in Hollywood, right? It's just astonishing to me. And I just think a lot of people are being fleeced by that organization. And you see that they're on the ropes in a lot of ways, but it's I think that's the case of people just saying, well, I got to send my dues into the NRA and not realizing the kind of the larceny that's been going on there.
I want to talk about it from the other perspective, because, you know, in my line of work, being involved in politics for years, and you know, a lot of things in my life relate back to my family and to my sister Heidi. And in my trips to D.C., where we would just sit around a table with other leaders all across the United States, what I found was they don't understand guns the way that I might, or from a perspective that you have as somebody who was in the military out there on the front lines. And right. I don't know that they ever will. I get the sense that if they were in a room and I brought out my dad's old shotgun, which he got from his dad and he got from his dad, and I said, hey, take a look at this, look at the wood grain, look at the artistry in it, that they would be so uncomfortable that they wouldn't want to be in that room. And I hope you see what I'm getting at. It's just, it was hard in our conversation to get them to a place where they would ever be comfortable being around a gun.
Right. Yeah, it's you're exactly right, because as we see, you know, some demographically they refer to it as the big sort that we have going on in our country right now around everything, right? Not just this issue. And as these two polar camps go to their respective extremes, that one group, that we'll call it the blue group, right? More and more of those people aren't brought up around guns and haven't handled them and are uncomfortable around them. This is one of the great things about having been in the military. But I do some work with Everytown for gun safety. They're a gun safety organization, and I'm with a group of military veterans who provide advice to them on a volunteer basis. And one of the things we did in one of our recent meetings with some of the staff from that organization is we took them to a range. Right, and one of our members, who's a former Delta Force and is a weapons instructor, ran them through, you know, all the paces with different handguns and rifles and all the rest of it. And so I think that there are ways to bridge the gap, because I think most people who've never handled a gun, the first time you go out with somebody who knows what they're doing and they get an opportunity to do a little target practice or shoot skeet or whatnot, walk away from it saying, man, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had that happen in my life. Once you can get them to convinced to come with, or even walk hunting, not necessarily carry a gun, but do a little pheasant hunting with me and just walk alongside and see the excitement and the fun of what your dad taught you. And sure. So it is a culture, like you said. That being said, I'm not convinced we ever can. I'm not convinced that with as polarized as the world is, that we're ever going to get to that place unless there's some strong leadership from both sides. How do we bring both of these sides together to put forth a policy that is reasonable, that will affect and do something when it comes to America? And so we're not sitting here waking up to the next shooting every time.
Right. Well, thanks. Yeah, I think it's a great way to think about it. It's a good thought exercise. And I think the first place I'd start, before we get to the policy stuff, and I'll get to that in a second, but I think the first place to start is I'd like to sort of say to all voters and anybody who's thinking about this issue is to convey that gun violence is not one problem. It's about 5 problems. And that fact is really what screws up a lot of our conversations in this country. So gun violence is suicides, which is about 2/3 of the 40,000 or so gun deaths we have a year here. Gun violence is domestic violence. About 52 women are shot and killed each month in this country by their boyfriend or husband. You've got mass shootings is a 3rd problem. Urban violence is a 4th problem. And a 5th problem is accidental shootings with children. And so what we have is somebody will be talking about an issue that'll help, let's say on the domestic violence side, for instance, universal background checks. And somebody on the other side will say, well, how's that ever going to help? But they're talking about urban gun violence, right? And so one of the first things you have to do when you understand the gun issue in this country is to understand it's 5 different issues, and different policies are going to help with different issues, but not all of them usually at once. So I just take a break and make sure that makes sense there before I keep going.
So, I go back to it, and people who think that this is an inner city problem, this happened in Mott, in the news today. There was a gun shooting in Mott at the school, and what it was about was it was about 2 men and the woman that they both loved, and it ended up in a death. And so, for those of us who believe we're immune to it here in the Upper Midwest, that's not true. That's not true at all. And what you just said is the violence can come from many different causes. How would you go about just sitting down with gun owners like myself and saying, look, if you think this is a freedom, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how you'd be willing to give would help over here with a problem that really you haven't created as a gun owner. I'm really curious about that, Michael.
Yeah. So the ethos in the military around guns is to focus on 3 things, which is training, safety, and accountability. And in your scenario, in terms of sitting down with gun owners, what I would do and what I actually do is appeal to gun owners' sense of responsibility. Most gun owners, the vast majority of gun owners, are responsible gun owners. They understand the safety issues around guns. Ever pointed a loaded weapon at something you don't intend to shoot? No, I treat every gun that is loaded. Know what's behind your target. Store your weapon and your ammunition securely and separately. Those are all common sense safety issues, and gun owners follow those, most gun owners, because they're responsible. And so when we look at this, we think, what is our responsibility? And what is, or a better way to think about it is, what does responsible gun ownership look like? And if we think about guns less as a cultural marker that defines us as members of a certain tribe, and we think about guns more as simply a tool that can be very deadly in the wrong hands, then we start to think, okay, there's certain sorts of people who should not have easy access to guns. And then that helps kind of clear the path towards something like universal background checks. And the interesting thing about that issue, and this is where, for me, the gun issue is so aggravating, is that when you go across America, Republican to Democrat, gun owner to non-gun owner, and you ask them about should we have universal background checks, and you explain the issue, The number of people, I think I've looked it up. You typically see 80, 90% of respondents say, yeah, we should do that. I looked it up about the number of Americans who say they like chocolate, and it was lower. If you can get that many Americans to like agree to something, you've got something. But the issue is that once you get to Washington, you've got all the forces at play where the most strident voices are causing, in cases where they're not even voting on it, right? Because it's a tough issue. So those are, there's more, but I mean, that's a place to start, which is to appeal to a sense of responsibility and to just say, because most gun owners, and I'm talking about like most hardcore Republican voting, pro-gun voters, when you talk to them, like you and I are talking to them, and you say like, hey, right now there's this loophole where somebody who wants to murder his wife and is got a felony, he can easily get a gun by getting it off the internet, and he can avoid all the background check stuff. And most gun owners are like, yeah, that's terrible. You shouldn't do that. It's just that when it gets into the public view, everything gets all excited and we lose the thread.
You're right, but there's no votes in that. There's no votes and there's no money in that. Now, I don't think money is as big of a factor in terms of lobbying dollars as it used to be, as you pointed out, to the NRA and some of the others, or, whether it's less power or whether it's less dedication from the people that pay membership dues. We spoke to that earlier, but what I'm talking about is votes. On the Republican side of the ticket, they're going to play to those gun owners and make them believe that the other side of the ticket is coming for your guns. And you see it, Michael. You see it in bumper stickers. You see it in people that you call friend, that are your friends. I don't, when votes are in it, I just don't know how you change it.
So I don't want to suggest anything other than that you're right, and it's a long road. Although I'm long-term optimistic because the demographics of this issue will change over time. But the one thing that I do want to point out is, and this is one of the reasons why I got involved in this, is because, and by the way, it's not like I come from some big anti-gun background or anything. I'm kind of a right of center, American voter, and didn't have that much of an issue about guns in one way or the other for a long period of time. It was only after I got out of the military, and then we had Parkland, the Las Vegas shooting. I think it was the Las Vegas shooting in particular, where as a military person, I was like, what? He had what in that hotel room? I mean, you got to be kidding me. And then you start to see what's going on, and then you think about how much rigor the U.S. military puts the service members through before they ever put a hand on a weapon. How the vast majority of military personnel, when they're on a base, they are not carrying a weapon. The military police are providing base security. You're not carrying a weapon. And I think a lot of civilians have a mistaken impression about what's going on. So when we talk about that gun-owning, very right-of-center voter, that voter is usually also very pro-military. And so talking to those people and saying, and that's what I'm trying to do. Let me tell you about the culture of guns in the military, and let me tell you how we approach it and why it works. It's not the same thing as saying, let's make the civilian laws exactly like they are in the military. But in this case, this is another one of those situations where the American civilian world can learn something from the American military.
But the narrative, Michael, the ability to get word out without, all of a sudden everybody drawing lines. Perfect example. The private sale of guns between two parties. Do you believe that Americans really understand how easy that is, and that there's no ramifications for it? That hey, beautiful shotgun, man, what do you give for it, or what do you take for it, kind of a thing. That's going to happen all the time.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think most Americans, when you say we should have universal background checks, they're like, oh, I think we already have those, because they're not aware of the fact that that's just for licensed firearm dealers, right? A lot of the issues that are issues, a lot of people will respond and say, I think we already have that. And in fact, we don't. We have these big loopholes that are there on purpose and were designed to be there on purpose. and it's not that complicated to close them, and most Americans agree that they should be.
Yeah. I mean, I walk into Shields, which is one of our big sportsman stores here, and I want to buy a new 870. Well, Remington's out of business now, but I want to buy a new Winchester. I'm going to leave with it. I mean, here's the other part that goes with that. I could be mad. I could go in there buying it for a specific purpose. There's no, 24-hour cooling down period type of a thing. I can just go in there, plop some money on the counter, fill out a little form, whether I'm accurate or not. They'll check it out later, and I leave with the gun.
Right.
And this comes from a gun advocate. This comes from somebody who's been around guns since I bought my dad bought me a Red Ryder BB gun. And so I don't think people realize that, Michael. I just don't.
I think, and another thing to consider, and I don't want to go down the rat hole of the wording of the Second Amendment, but the phrase well-regulated is in there, a well-regulated militia. And this is, again, part of what I want people to understand, that the U.S. military is a very, very regulated, more regulated than you would expect the civilian world to be. But the civilian world is almost completely unregulated. The idea that you can go and purchase a gun and really not have any requirements for demonstrations of proficiency or understanding. You look at what we run through in the military in terms of understanding your weapon, how it works, how it functions, how you clear a jam, how you handle it safely. None of that is apparent in the civilian world. And you just look at what we require for people to drive a car in this country and what we don't require for somebody to own a deadly weapon. And it's just astonishing.
Michael, where do people find your work?
Just at my website, which is michaeldiamond.com. It's very easy to find it. Just my name.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for your service to this country.